And the newspaper reporter was standing as close as that pole when that cancer fell out of a man's neck and rolled across my foot. And I picked it up and laid it on a piece of paper. And I was afraid to put his hands on it. And he asked a man if he could get the picture. He said yes. But he took the picture of his neck where he dropped out a minister. I seen a man one night with one on the side of his nose, looked like a great seedwort, white about like that. And on the ends of it, the inside, it was real bloody and red, just like this was. And while I was praying for him, the cancer left, and no one seen where it went. His face went as smooth. In the same meeting, I'd seen a woman come in with a handkerchief over her face. That's the meeting I stayed 8 days and nights without leaving. And the woman come, she had a handkerchief over her face like this. I thought she was weeping. It was along 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I took a hold of her hand and I thought she was weeping. I said, Lady, why the vibration is cancer? She moved her handkerchief down. Her nose was eaten off. Young woman, about 38 years old, 40. So I said, oh my. And she said, I've just been given up by the best of doctors. It's done too far gone now. They can't do nothing. They fought it with the X-ray treatments, radium, and everything, but it's too far gone. I said, do you believe? She said, with all of my heart. I said, will you take my word for what I say? She said, I will. I said, let us pray. And I prayed, the vibration stopped. I said, Sister, there's only one thing I can tell you. You just have my word. The blessing of God is upon you. If you'll accept it and accept my word and believe that I told you what God has said in my heart, you'll get well. And about 2 months after that, I was in a certain place, and here was a young fellow standing there. He said, raised right up in the meeting, he said, can I testify, Reverend Branham? And I said, what is it? Go ahead. I said, say on. And he said, look here, do you remember? I said, I'm an exterminator from Texarkana. I said, my mother sitting here about 2 months ago came to you with no nose. Said, I want you to look at her now, just as perfect as she could be. Well, that's right. And he said, I've got the doctor's statements already here too, with it. And where it was, and a picture before and after, where it was a statement. In the meeting, wife came down, and the baby was just a little bitty thing then, just about 3, 4 months old. And she came down that night. We went out to the train to pick her up. I went to service that night, and before we got there, about 2 city blocks away, it was just like it's here. The people, those Arkansas people, is there? There's some of them here. I'm sure I never had a meeting, even in Canada. But what? There's somebody from Arkansas. Anybody here originally from Arkansas? That's your hands. That's right. I know that. That's right. I know. See, I've never seen. I was going to ask them in London, England, and Sweden. Anywhere you go, you find people from Arkansas. When I was over on the West Coast and I said, here, there one night while I was having services with Charles Fuller at the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium, Brother Fuller said, Brother Branham, the people over here will never come to hear such fanaticism. I said, oh, they won't? No, said, you better preach the gospel while you're over here. I said, that's what I'm doing. He said, well, that's divine healing. I said, Brother Fuller, I belong to the Baptist church too. I know how you feel about it. But I said, let me tell you something. He said, Brother Branham, everything over here is divine healing. Said, people won't come out. He said, first is that McPherson movement. Next was that fanatic Pentecost. He said, and all up and down this street here, and everything's got divine healing. And he said, people won't come out. You're renting that auditorium for nearly $1,000. He said, you're going to be left alone. I said, look, Brother Fuller, I said, God will recognize his gift if it was in the middle of a hell. See? I said, don't worry about that. He said, well, I can't advertise it. I said, I never asked you to, Brother Fuller. I just talking to you, said, come on down and kick your heart in. I said, I'll be there. But he said, I'm telling you, before you'll be left without. We went down there, and that afternoon, Brother Moore and a group of us had about 20,000 people sitting around. And when his group went out, He had his sermon. Now remember, Charles Fuller is a wonderful God sent man, a real Christian man. Don't know whether you ever got his program or not. He has the old fashioned Our Revival, which is a very fine program. Wonderful, marvelous teacher. A good man, aged. He's getting pretty aged, but he's a good man. I believe he's a real Christian. And when we was leaving, Brother Fuller was going out. Brother Moore and I were standing there. And there went his audience out after he made a fine talk. And a lady came down, shook hands with him to give her heart to Christ, which is wonderful. He was going to start out. And there, when all of his crowd out, fine dressed people, very highly educated, he was standing there telling them, just you believe right now and be saved. That's all, see? Then when his crowd went going out, here come my crowd in handkerchiefs, straight jackets. Brother, it's a different thing when your faith has to back something like that. Just preach, speak into a crowd and tell them to raise up their hands and accept Christ. He turned pale looking. That night, there's so many people there. They stood plumb up and down the side of the bench. A 5,500 auditorium wouldn't even seat half of them. They were standing out everywhere. I tell you, where the carcass is, the eagles will be gathering. You can depend. Notice, wife was there that night. When we looked and seen all that mess of people standing there, Jonesboro, she said, honey, did all those come to hear you preach? I said, no. They've come from the east and west. They've come from the north and south, and the lands are far to the feast with the king to dine as his guests. I said, the children of the king. I said, they're not here to see me, honey. They're here to see Jesus. She said, well, how will you ever get to the auditorium? I said, they'll be meant to meet me at the bottom of the hill here. I looked at that crowd. I said, raise up my hands. I said, dear dying lamb, thy precious blood shall never lose power, till all the ransomed church of God be saved to see no more. The gospel is the greatest drawing card the world's ever had. That's right. Though preached in its simplicity, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. That's true. A lady that afternoon had been blind. She walked out and she see the trees and things. She went over there at the graveyard, looked at the tombstones where some of her people had been buried years since she's seen. So 4 men. I never seen what become of the wife after that. They was pressing me into the crowds, towards the crowd. There's probably 2,000 people standing against the door like that. And so we finally squeezed through the crowd until we got on the inside and hadn't slept. So I was just so weary. I lost about 28 pounds of weight and I was pressing into the crowd. Them great big strong fellows pushing me through. And I got up to the platform. There was 18 or 20 stretchers, cases setting right along like that. The setting right here was a little girl. She was tuberculosis. Her nurses were with her. And I just got to the platform and I started to look down and I could feel the vibration coming. There'd been a great thing happen there that afternoon. There was a lady come across the platform. Another instance, I took a hold of her hand. She had a female vibration. I said, you have a female trouble. She had a little boy on her arm. She said, yes, sir. I said, do you believe me? She said, with all my heart. I took a hold of her hand and I began to pray. It wouldn't leave her. And I said, sister, I don't understand why. Are you a Christian? She said, yes, sir. And I looked at her. There it moved out. A vision began to move. Now remember, that woman standing there was told of living and true to her marriage vows 4 days before that. Before the audience, 20,000 people were better listening. And she started crying. The man behind her was her husband. He jerked her around and said, what's this? You see why I have to pray often? What's this? She said, darling, I'm sorry. Then I just let myself loose. It moved over on him and told him of the same act with his bookkeeper and the car they were in and where they were at. He turned white. He said, brother, what must I do? I looked. He looked at her and reached out his hand, said, darling, I've been a rat. Said, if you'll forgive me, I'll forgive you, and we'll start life anew right here before God's people. She said, I forgive you. And they put a little boy between them and hung one another, knelt down on the floor and gave their hearts to God. and Reverend Richard T. Reed of Jonesboro, Arkansas, baptized them into Christian faith. The next morning, they were added to the church. That's the way the Lord works truly. Now, when they was at the platform, this little girl was looking, and I looked up at her, and I looked down to her rather, and she was looking up at me, and I kept seeing someone standing to my right, kept motioning their hands like this, and I looked down there, and I seen some people rejoicing that when a blind man from up in Kennett was healed that night before that, and he was going on his road home. She'd been drawing a blind pension for 12 years, and he was healed. I asked God to bless him. I said, "Do you believe?" He said, "With all my heart." I said, "Go on rejoicing, testifying of your healing." They led him out to an old Ford. He started up the road, about 100 and something miles up to Kennett, Missouri, and was going up the road, praising God for his sight, just as blind as he could be. All at once he screamed. He said, "Stop the car. I see the light." He jumped out of the car. Up and down the road he went, jumping and screaming. He went into Kennett, just or at the Catholic Church, was having a mass, put his cane up in the air and his hat on there. He walked down to the Catholic Church screaming, I'm healed by the glory of God." Out into the Methodist Church he went, up and down the streets like the country there. They were testifying everywhere was healing. Looking out on one side, I seen a man motioning his hand like this, and I thought it looked like an ambulance driver. He had on a blue looking uniform. And I said, "Are you motioning for me, sir?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Brother Branham," I said, "I've been brought my patient down from Kennett, where the blind man was healed this morning." He said, "And I've got to make another trip tonight from the hospital." And I said, "I think my patient's dead. We had to have a house doctor there. There was so many sick and things. You have to have a house doctor. We couldn't find him anywhere." Said, "I think my patient's dead. Won't you come to her?" And I said, "Brother, I'd like to go. But how could I get through that crowd? There's probably 2 or 3 thousand people between here and there." They had a row reserved for ambulances out there, many of them, 18 or 20 of them, sitting in that row. And I said, "Well, I couldn't get out there." Foreman stepped down out to the balcony, said, "We'll take you, Brother Branham, if you wish to go." I said, "Well, if you'll sing a hymn while I'm gone or something." One of the ministers stepped out the microphone and they started me through the crowd. Oh my, I was pushing and people crying and begging. "Oh, you have." We got out to the ambulance. They opened the door and stepped to the car. And one sight that I shall never forget. Sometime when I get alone in the mountains, I sat down and think this thing's over. Now, I don't have time handling. And there was a dear old Arkansas brother, very typical, an old faded out blue shirt on, been washed many times, his hat sewed, the top of it with twine, wrapping cord his shoes, the soles of them about off, and was kneeling down at the floor, gripping his hat, and needed a shave real bad, and the tears rolling down his face, saying, "God, give me mother back." And I looked, laying there, the little woman with her mouth open, her eyes open, also sat back, and the intern said, "Here's Brother Branham." He turned around, said, "Oh, Brother Branham," said, "How I wanted to see you." Said, "She's a good woman." Brother Branham said, "She's helped. She's raised 5 children." Said, "They're all grown and married." Said, "Now we," said, "we've got a little place." And said, we picked blackberries last summer and sat together and said, she made some quills and said, she's been so bad with cancer. Said, they give her up. And we sold the blackberries yesterday and some of her quills so we could have the money to pay for the ambulance to bring us down here. Said, she wanted to see you so bad. And she's gone, Brother Branham. It was her last request. I've done all I could do, sir. And I said, God bless you, Dad. I put my hand, I said, you'll see her in a better land then. He said, yes, she was a Christian, Brother Branham. But oh, she wanted to see you so bad. I said, all right. I said, took hold of her hand now. I did not know whether the woman was gone or not. God is mine. I think she was in a coma, I'm not sure. Although I couldn't feel her heart, no nothing. But now listen, when I put my hand on her, she felt cold. I put my hand on her hand, it felt cold. And it looked like muddy looking stuff had run from her eyes. And she had false teeth taken out, and her lips was drawn in, and her mouth setting back like that. Her face real thin, and she was had her eyes set right back like that, and she was laying that away. And I took a hold of her. I shook her. Seemingly she was dead. Whether she was, I do not know. God is my judge. I couldn't see, but when I took a hold of her hand, there went that cancer. Well, I knew then. I think now if the woman had been dead, the cancer would have left too. I believe it would. And that's the reason I think she was in a coma. So I was holding her hand and it was hitting. I could feel it hitting like that, turning, hitting. So then I said, Dad, let's pray. And he said, all right, Father Branham. And he got down on his knees and began to call him, saying, God, why did you let her go like that? Why couldn't she just have lived a little while longer? Now, after hearing him praying, I started crying myself. I couldn't help it. Poor old fellow. I looked at him. His old hands was raising up to God, and his feeble and trembling. And I said, Heavenly Father, you who brought again Jesus from the dead, I said, be merciful, comfort the brother's heart. I kept on. I kept on praying. He was just screaming at the top of his voice. And I said, Father, be merciful and heal her. And the vibration of the cancer stopped. Well, Satan said to me then, she died then. Well, I just kept holding on. I said, Lord, I believe that you brought up Lazarus from the grave. I believe you give the woman, the widow, her son again. I believe you laid hands upon Jairus' daughter and she came to life. Now you are here. You can spare her life. And I'm just looking to you, Father. I pray that you'd hear me like that. And I felt a grip. My hand, I know it was alive then. I didn't say it. I just quit praying and watching him crying so much. He didn't hear me cease praying. And I looked and I seen his skin on her forehead begin to wrinkling. I knew life was in the woman, and I just stood there a little bit on the side of the bed. In a few moments, she was beginning to look around. Said, how do you do? He had got down on the floor with his head on the floor, just a crying in the ambulance. And I said, how do you do? She said, how are you? I said, I'm Brother Branham. She said, oh, you are? I said, set up. And she sat up like that. He raised up, looked at her. He said, Mother, Mother. And he threw his arms around her and began to hug her like that. And they were just screaming, both of them together, sitting in the ambulance. I decided to go out the door. And the driver sat there, the intern, the driver. He said, Brother Branham, you couldn't get out that door. Said, they just parked against there. Said, I'll tell you what I'll do. Said, I sent those men all around, way back in the parking lot, standing full of people, and some of them hadn't left there for 8 days. It was drizzling rain, and so they had this set right in the seat. Anyone on the inside stayed there. They let somebody go out and get them hamburger or something, come in, they'd eat right there. They wouldn't move. They stayed right there, slept right in their seats. And he just started unbuttoning his coat like this and hold it back at the door. Like he was taking his coat off. Said, now when I do that, you go out the other side and they're going to meet you down there at the end. I said, all right. That looked like a hypocritical deed, but I just couldn't. I had to do it. I couldn't get back to the auditorium. And I went out the side like that. The other side, which was near the fence, I went down along that row ambulances there and way down, come around the end of the alley, come into a big parking lot and just about as far as 3-4 times distant, and it was milling full of people. Well, I thought, where are those people at? And no one knew me. They hadn't seen me back there. So I started pushing through, trying to get up towards the door. I thought maybe they'd be up there towards the door. And the big lights out there, and I was going pushing through like this, and everybody hollering, "Sit down, quit pushing." I just kept on going, and I quit pushing, and I just kept on going. After a while, there was a big fellow standing there, whittling with his knife. I kind of stepped out against him like that. I said, "Pardon me." He said, I said, "Quit pushing." I was afraid he was going to push, so I did stop. And so I said, "Hey, yes, sir, excuse me." I stood there a little bit. He was looking down at me, kept on whittling, talking to the fellow. I looked at him a little bit till he got his head turned good, and I looked around to see where the door was. It's quite a distance here to the door. I couldn't see no one coming for me next. So I had a cry. I had somebody hollering, "Daddy, daddy, oh daddy," the most pathetic cry. I looked around to see where it was coming. Coming down to the audience, come a well-dressed colored girl, just as blind as she could be. Her eyes were just as white with cataracts, nearly as my shirt. She was coming along like this, nobody noticing her coming along like that, hollering, "Daddy, oh daddy," and I watched her. And I thought, well now, isn't that amazing? Looked like somebody would help that poor girl, regardless of what they think about it. They ought to help that girl some way. I thought, I believe I'll help her. I didn't see no one. So I started moving out to her, and I thought, maybe the Lord will heal her. So I began to think about that. And I had her crying, and she was crying, and I walked out, and I thought, I'll just try her faith, just get a conversation with her, and ever which way she was going, I'd make myself get right in her way. And finally, she bumped into me and she said, "Excuse me, sir." And I said, "That's Southern talk, sir." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she backed off. She said, "Daddy," I thought, now I'll just see what kind of a faith you have. That looked like a hypocrite again to do that. And I said, "What do you want?" She said, "Sir, I lost my daddy. I can't find him. No. Where?" I said, "Look like you're blind." She said, "Yes, sir, I'm blind." "Nice talking, lady." And I said, "Well, I don't see no more colored people around here." I said, "Where you from?" She said, "I's from Memphis."